All right, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. We are going to talk about some general trends in the travel goods space in the US this year, what I expect for the future, and also just general consumer behavior and sentiment information. Here's a little bit about me. I'm not going to go into all this detail. As Rachel mentioned, I also I cover travel goods, fashion accessories, also footwear. So in addition to looking at everybody's great product out here on the floor, I'm also going to be looking at everybody's shoes. So, don't mind me if I'm doing that. And of course, footwear can also, the definition of travel goods is broadening. And you see there's a, footwear brand Oka over there that, great comfort for travel. So all important to think about when consumers are trying to, pack their suitcases for travel. You can scan, I'm going to put that QR code back up at the end and would love for you, give it a scan. It'll go to my LinkedIn profile. So at Circana, we are tracking about over $3 trillion in US retail spend across all of these industries that you see here, the broader industries. So travel goods does kind of fall in with the fashion umbrella, which maybe a number of years ago might have sounded strange, but actually we've been infusing a lot more fashion into the industry. But we do have an accessories segment, and then within that, a travel goods segment. And what we do at Circana is a number of things. Mainly, we measure market performance, both from doing consumer tracking surveys and also from our retailer relationships, where we receive data from retailers, and then we kind of bundle it up and then help our clients use the data to make decisions. And you'll see a combination of this type of data being used today. As well as a little bit of advanced analytics where we do some work into what's happening with pricing and promotions, and also deeper surveys to really understand what's happening with the consumer. And then lastly, we're doing some more advanced work in consulting area and also with media. Obviously, there are many more ways to reach your consumers today, and so we are working with our clients to help target the right groups and then measure the impact. All right, so let's get into it. So first, I'm going to start with the big picture. So one of the things I love the most about working at Circana is the available information across industries. And that really helps us understand what people are spending their money on, and then helps us put into context the trends that we see in our industry. So we're going to look across industries, do the big picture first, and then we'll get into what's happening with travel goods. And you can see a little bit of a hint here. While there is a lot of excitement and there are certainly areas of growth, overall we have seen what has been a sort of natural market slowdown after a number of years of really strong post-pandemic recovery. And then we'll close it out, a look ahead to some consumer sentiment information, but also just talk about, what we can do to continue to keep that excitement up in the industry. Okay, so I know there's a lot on this slide. It's going to be hard to see everything, but this is essentially the major industries that we track and how they performed in the last year, basically 2024 versus 2023. So at the top, you'll see home decor, followed just slightly after that by prestige beauty. Now, beauty has been the star industry for the past 3-4 years coming out of the pandemic. It seems like they can't lose. All kinds of consumer groups, ages, income levels have really prioritized beauty. There's a lot of innovation there, a lot of interest in wellness and self-care, a lot of social media activity, so similar to what we're seeing happen in travel goods now, has really happened in beauty and has really driven that industry. And then, of course, we've got, I have a 12-year-old daughter, so you've got the tween influence, and her interest in it have definitely changed my behavior, so it's really interesting to watch there. But we're also seeing a lot of growth in a number of home categories, which is interesting because home was really strong during the pandemic, and then kind of as we came out and emerged from our homes, it slowed down. But now what we're seeing is that cycle is coming back, and part of it is because things outside of our homes have become a bit more expensive, right? Like going out to eat and all that. So we're doing a more entertaining, more cooking at home, but also that we're up for some replenishment of some of those purchases that we made during the pandemic for our homes are kind of now set to be replenished. And consumers are doing more budget home improvement, so maybe can't afford right now or stretch for the full renovation, but they are doing little projects, and that's helping retail in the home space. You'll see a bunch of other industries up there growing. A lot of them are growing because prices are growing. So unit sales aren't necessarily growing, but of course we all know that prices have really increased, and we'll talk about that for travel goods as well, over the last few years due to a number of reasons. I do want to, point your attention right to the middle there. It's about $1 trillion number in retail food and beverage, up 3% versus last year, and that's still being driven by price. So that is your trips to the grocery store. So I'm sure everybody feels like you're spending more, right, at the grocery store. Of course, the drama lately is all about eggs. And so while inflation is starting to slow there, it's still there. And so people are paying more for the things that they're buying every day, and that's had an impact on where else they're spending their money. So mostly on the bottom there, the industries that are declining are the more discretionary categories, a lot of fashion. Accessories actually is up 1% versus last year, but within it we see travel goods, which is down 6%. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And I mentioned pricing, so that's obviously a big piece of it. When we look versus last year, prices seem to have leveled out, and we've actually seen them start to come down in travel goods. So we'll talk about that too, but that looks good. However, if I overlay 2019, so how the prices have trended versus about 5 years ago, at the end of 2024, it's significant. So retail food and beverage and consumer packaged goods up about 40%. General merchandise, which includes fashion categories, it includes tech, toys, beauty, that's up 20%. And then in travel goods, it's similar. So we've seen the prices of our travel goods increase. Now, part of that is a mix shift and consumers choosing higher price point products in some areas because we have shown them the value, which is great, and that's what everybody is trying to do here with all of the innovation. So consumers have shown that they are willing to spend a bit more when there is value, and value means different things to different consumers. It's not all about price. But of course, I know there's going to be other talks on this, but of course we're right now in this situation where we're not exactly sure what's going to happen with tariffs and our price is going to go up more in the US. We just have to remember that the consumer's already, coming at it at a vantage point that they're already spending plenty more than they were 5 years ago. And that's the same across all of these industries, so it obviously will be a challenge. All right, so let's look at the travel goods industry. Before I get into actual luggage and other travel goods, like I said earlier, the definition is broad, and we can see that when we walk the floor here. And there are other areas where we're tracking in other industries where we wouldn't really think they're related to travel, but they do have products that are related to travel. So books, we've seen travel books grow, and each year, the focus, the subcategories and the topics that grow are a little bit different. And in 2024, it was a lot about adventure and maps and parks and camping. And that is really, there is continued interest in that coming out of the pandemic. Beauty, so I talked about beauty as a whole, but we see trial size and minis, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, and you see it on social media as well, just all of the organization and ways to carry all the beauty products with us. And these are like little luxuries as well. So if we're, not stretching to make bigger purchases, these are purchases that, give us a little bit of, maybe make us feel good. Garment care, so steamers, as we're maybe traveling more for occasions. And then tech, item trackers have been big. It's slowed down in the last year, but versus 2 years ago, item trackers are very strong. And that, there was that bout of, lost luggage, and now I'm starting to see products out there where, there's that designated spot. Of course, you can throw it in anywhere, but I think that's interesting to see being worked into luggage. So, tech is there as well. Okay, so now let's look at travel goods. So the definition is broad, and there's definitely some things in here that it's hard to attribute absolutely to travel. For example, the definition of travel goods that I will, for the most part, use throughout the presentation is luggage, all backpacks, duffels, and we call them fanny packs, belt bags, sling bags, variety of terminology. Now, of course, we can attribute. I mean, if it's luggage and suitcases, it's pretty easy to say that is for travel purposes. For backpacks, we can't always attribute everything to travel. But if I took them out, then I'm removing a big piece of the business. So this is a broad definition, and you can see the growth that we have had since the pandemic. Now, I don't have 2019 data because we had changed our way of collecting the data, and so I don't have the history. However, my estimation is that in 2024, dollars for travel goods were about 25% ahead of 2019. So, sales plummeted in 2020. Not a surprise to anyone. I know you were all there when that happened, and then they really started to pick back up, and we really saw nice growth throughout the next few years through 2023. But then in 2024, we saw a slowdown. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, overall, consumer spending was challenged in many areas in 2024 as the inflation and other macro challenges continued to weigh on consumers. But also, we had that nice natural recovery after the pandemic where consumers and travelers wanted to replenish their luggage and did so. And we do know, I'll show you in a little bit, but we know that luggage is not a high purchase frequency category, which does make it a challenge. And so, that's going to be kind of a natural slowdown. So if we look versus last year, we see that dollar sales were down 6%, but unit sales were only down 1%. So dollars being down more than units means that prices are down. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Mostly, average prices are down, and most of that is due to maybe some mix shift towards some lower price point products, but also some additional promotional activity as the retail environment got a little bit more challenging last year. So if we break it out by category, backpacks is actually the biggest piece. And as I mentioned before, backpacks is very broad. So it isn't just specific backpacks made for travel. Obviously, you've got a very robust backpack business, in general for school and work and all of that, but those also get used for travel, followed by suitcases and sets and garment bags, duffels, the fanny packs, and then other travel accessories. So dollars for the most part are down across the board with the exception of travel accessories. Units are mixed. You've got some categories like suitcases where units are actually up, but dollars being down means that the average price is lower. And that's a similar in the fanny pack business. And then we can also track, are we bringing more buyers in than the year before? So we've got that as well. And this is such an interesting picture to me because to me this is a little bit all over the place because you've got some areas where we've brought more buyers in, but dollars are down. In some cases, they're buying more units, but prices are down. So it's a little bit of a mix, but consumers are really focused on, those particular categories that they may need, and some of the peripheral categories as well, as they may have bought a big piece, in the last few years. Now they're focused on, okay, what are the other categories that I can buy? And I mentioned promotions. So we did see that promotional activity was up last year. So that average selling price was down about 5%, which is that difference that you saw between the dollar sales trend and the unit sales trend. And we can break this down. So non-promoted price change, that is the price trend of items being sold at close to regular price. So that being down slightly suggests that maybe there's a little bit of a mix shift to lower price point products. But the promoted price was down 12%. So that's really where the additional promotional activity comes in. And we see we saw more units sold on promotion last year at a higher average promoted discount, and that drives that. So not huge, when you look at 1 point versus last year, 2 points, but you don't often see these numbers move much. And so it was a year where we started to see some additional promotional activity, which is definitely something that is a challenge and needs to be managed, and certainly strategy. And there are times when the market is extremely promotional, like during the July timeframe, where there's a lot of promotion going on, and then during holiday. So of course you've got to, play at that point and, promote, or else you might be at a disadvantage. But the good news is that the promotions that we saw last year actually drove more business than the prior year. So the promotions were more effective. So I think we're getting a little bit better at actually knowing what exactly to promote and when. And that is some work that we do with some of our clients looking at our pricing data. So here's a top retailer. So the market is both very concentrated and also very fragmented, because you've got big two at the front. And Amazon, you might be surprised at how much volume Amazon is doing in this space and growing. And then you see the, Walmart's the other big player. So these two are generating more than 50% of the business, followed by Target. And the arrows just represent like whether they gained or lost or were flat in share versus last year. So more stable, but Amazon continues to grow. You might be surprised to see Lululemon on there. And actually, if you were here last year, I showed a slide that actually had the growth of Lululemon in the travel space. This is going to be from their belt bag, because that's their bag. The amount of volume that belt bag has sold, and it makes sense. A great price point, entry price point to the brand. Great for travel, great for every day. So that's really what's driving their volume there, and it has since slowed, and they haven't really had a product that has kept up the momentum. That belt bag at this point is pretty saturated out there. And then department stores still a big business for travel goods, but just in general have slowed down. And so, in line with that number you just saw for Amazon, travel goods online have really spiked. In 2021, about half the market was being done online, and now it's up to 60%. And that is considerably higher than a number of other categories. The average for total retail is about 25% of sales being done online. And of course, you've got food in there, which is lower. Even beauty, it leans much more towards in-store, although the online piece is growing there. This is more like some categories like home categories, tech categories, a lot being done online. So, at this point, this industry is a majority online business. And Amazon is doing the bulk of that. 70% of the online business is coming from Amazon. That's up 7 points versus 2021, up 1 point versus last year. So that momentum is slowing there, and we're starting to see growth come from other online as well, including brands' own online businesses. But the big piece with Amazon is the amount that's third party. So about 3/4 of it is third party brands, either managing their storefronts themselves on Amazon, or it is a lot of the product that is out there from a lot of the little brands that Amazon brings in or creates. So here's a lot, and some of you may see some of your brands on here. And so what this is just showing you is that some of the top players. Now, there are so many brands in the space, and I'm only showing top 5 in a couple of these categories. So, there's many more out there, but I've broken it out sort of the traditional retail, which would be more like your department stores, chain stores, big online players, and the sports outdoor retail, because, that's a strong business as well. So athletic, outdoor specialty, big box athletic retailers. So on the left in each area, you see the top brands, and then on the right, you see the top growth brands. So who are the brands that are doing the most actual volume, but then who are the brands that are actually driving the most dollar growth? And what's really interesting, and we've seen this in other industries as well, is you've got the big players that are doing the bulk of the volume. So for example, you see 50% of sales coming from these 5 brands in traditional retail. but most of the growth is coming from a very small amount, smaller players, and driving only a small amount of sales. So there's really opportunity both in the traditional space and the sports space for emerging and small brands to really make an impact. And even if they're not capturing a lot of the share, they're starting to make a dent, and there is definitely business to be had and growth opportunities. And of course, in a slowing market, one of the ways, I know we're all friends here and we're all in one industry, but one of the ways to grow is to take share away. Obviously, the goal is to continue to grow the industry together, but sometimes, it's a share game when there isn't that natural growth. Private label as well. So private label is about 15% of sales, give or take, in these two retail formats. And it had been soft, but we did see a little bit of growth in private label as retailers look to develop their own brands a little bit more. So obviously features are super important, and I think we need to redesign surveys to ask about so many more features. It really would be impossible because I'm seeing so much out there. But some of this is pretty obvious. I mean, wheels, lightweight. Some of this is standard at this point. Carry-on, that is, in terms of units, carry-on is the biggest when you're looking at carry-on versus luggage sets versus checked baggage. And then expandable, and it's funny because hard case is just about a quarter say that it's important, but it's by far now the majority of the business. Almost 2/3 of the business is hard case, and that's up 8 points versus a couple of years ago, but it's up only about 2 points versus last year. So again, and we're seeing a more soft comeback a little bit. I think the hybrid is something that's very interesting that we saw a bit of this morning. So there is room now, once something kind of reaches a little more saturation and start to overlay things that maybe consumers have not seen in a while or really ever before. So hard case important, and then expandable continues to grow as well, and the momentum really is keeping up here because consumers are just looking for that additional function, things that can compress when not needed, but then can expand to allow the extra room. So super important. And then organization has become, I love organization videos. I see, some that I follow out here in the audience. And so I think, it's really becoming, it's in footwear and apparel, we talk about how function has become the new fashion, and I think that's really, it's true for travel goods as well, and really the ways consumers really, things that they didn't know they need, and I love to see all of the talk about focus groups and really consumer interviews and watching and observing how consumers move and travel and what are the features, because this is the type of innovation that's going to keep the industry going, and it's going to convince consumers that they need to replace or they need to upgrade. So social media has been a huge driver across industries, but really has picked up. And now this data that I'm going to show you is actually a year old. We asked these questions last year, and we haven't repeated them, so I'm going to try to do so next year. But 2/3 of consumers almost said that they have made a purchase of an item as a result of seeing it on social media. And that could be across any type of item. And it's higher for younger consumers, not surprisingly. And where they saw, I think this is also going to be shifting. So as of a year ago, TikTok was the lowest, but it was actually much higher among younger consumers, not surprisingly. So they're seeing it on the various social media platforms, and then we're seeing an increase now in buying off of the social media links, which, as not surprising, as the platforms and working together with brands and retailers really work to develop the process really to make it easier to buy, to kind of remove the friction there. And luggage is a little lower down when we ask, okay, you bought an item, what kind of item? So most apparel was the most bought item, but luggage is there. And I think if I had had I been able to redo this year, I think we would see these numbers be a little higher. So this is definitely something we're going to continue to watch. But of course, the rise of social media and online has given, you know, a new meaning to sort of, it's not knockoffs, right? We've got a new term, dupes. It's not so new anymore. And it's changed the narrative in terms of, you know, it's almost become something that is impressive, right? Or something to brag about. Oh, look at this, look what I found. I found a cheaper version of, you know, this product that, you know, everybody wants. And so we asked a survey about dupes last year, and I talked about it last year, but we actually asked these questions right after the show, so I'm showing the data now. Now, most people, when they're buying dupes, they're saying, half said they bought an apparel dupe, followed by a handbag or footwear. But then luggage, about 20% said that they had bought a luggage dupe. And, you know, it's not in a negative way, right? Like I said, it's come into much more of a positive light. Now, most people are buying them on Amazon. So that also ties back into the big business that we see on Amazon in this space. And of course, you know, I'm sure you see it, but it's brand after brand. And this is just one example, and I chose a very obvious one to show. But, you know, there is, you know, take any prominent product out there and, you know, you Google it or, you know, research and, you know, the term dupe comes up and, you know, there is just options for in every price point with the same look. Now, I'm not, you know, wouldn't necessarily, it's not a knockoff, right? You're not going to say that Lug-X looks exactly like the Rimowa, but, you know, it's for people that want the look, and now it's just become much more accessible. So this is definitely something that, you know, is a challenge, I think, you know, for the brands in the industry. But the good news is that as a purchase driver, quality is, you know, number one. So I asked consumers what is most likely to influence your purchase of luggage that you're planning to buy this year, and quality is number one. So we have the opportunity. I mean, all of those that I just showed on that prior slide, those are all good quality products. But there is a long tail beyond that of, you know, even you know, less expensive and no-name products. So we just, as brands, as retailers, just need to continue to be promoting our reason for being and the quality of our products compared to maybe a lower-priced alternative. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and just talk about some of the things that I'm watching as we look to, you know, the rest of this year and probably in the next year being a little bit softer in terms of the industry. You know, what are the things that are going to drive growth? So we've got some considerable headwinds. Most of those are about consumer sentiment right now and some of the macro pressures on consumers. So inflation has been sticky on products, we talked about that earlier, but also on services, also on travel. So that's going to be a challenge for consumers, not necessarily, you know, having the budget. Climate issues, you know, the nature of travel changing and places that people used to love to go to just being, you know, too hot or too cold. Sort of more extreme weather events that are happening. The, you know, international geopolitical environment is, you know, potentially a little bit shaky and you know, people in different countries might have different views on that. And then some more recent safety concerns, of course, really on everything you look at here, everything is much more accessible and visible now. So these are things that have existed for all of time, but, you know, just the nature of what you can see on social media and everything comes to the forefront. So when there were a few flight incidents, airline incidents earlier this year. You know, there are a partner of ours, Civic Science, which is a polling company, did a survey, and, you know, almost 70% of people were, you know, said that they were somewhat reluctant to fly after a couple of those incidents. And, you know, that tends to sort of work itself out, but when you have all of this that is very highly publicized, politicized, it, you know, it makes things a little bit challenging to sort of break through the clutter. But on the other hand, the industry still definitely has a lot of tailwinds. There is still a lot of demand for travel. Experience, documenting experience, you know, just coming out of the pandemic, I think that idea, you know, you only live once, you know, having FOMO, wanting to document, wanting to experience things. That's all very important. There's been interest, we talked about this last year, kind of in the midst of like, the Eras Tour, just the way people were traveling around the globe for that and other events, sports, adventure travel. So there is definitely a lot of demand there. And remote and more flexible work has really made travel a little bit more possible at other times. It's made it easier for people to go places and maybe work there, or just to be a little bit more flexible with when they're working. And so while it might be a challenge that things are costing more and maybe there isn't as much budget for travel products as they were, we definitely know that as long as the demand for travel keeps up, we will, that will help, because we certainly saw during the pandemic that when people didn't go anywhere, they didn't buy things. So even though they may not be stretching and their wallets may not be going as far, we want them to be out there and traveling, and that is still happening, which is good. And work, I just mentioned that I just want to show you here. That's one of the things we talk about in terms of going back to the office, everybody's in the office, everybody's remote. It's not very black and white, right? The return to office was back in the news earlier this year. Lots of companies bringing their workers back to the office, but the data actually shows that average office occupancy is about half of what it was pre-pandemic. So a lot of flexibility out there, which allows for more travel. It allows us to be creative with products, for people that maybe are commuting a couple of days a week, traveling some other times, running errands. We're multitasking a lot these days. So it gives us something to really tap into those lifestyles of consumers. Civic Science also did recently do a poll that does show that if tariffs kind of lead to higher prices across a lot of the things that they're paying for, that travel could get cut back. Not quite as much as some other categories, but just something that we'll need to watch and be aware of. But passenger counts, I like to follow this because, for many years we saw that sales of luggage really went along with the passenger counts at TSA in the US. It's diverged a little bit, but we also see, passenger volume really came roaring back, and it is now just above where it was in 2019 pre-pandemic, but that growth has slowed, and that makes sense because we lost 60% of the passenger volumes in 2020, and so there was that pent-up demand and people coming back, and so now we've gotten back up to that level, and it's actually been great that we've seen it continue to increase. Lots of headlines about TSA screenings hitting an all-time high last year in 2024, but as this slows, this could also present a little bit of a challenge for the industry. But again, we've got positives as well, and that demand for travel. So 40% of consumers told us that they plan to travel for leisure more in 2025 than they did in 2024. And it's half of them said that within the ages of 18 to 34. So that younger consumer is really placing emphasis on travel, actually seeing a lot of products trying to gear more toward a younger traveler as well. That does not mean that older ages are not traveling, but so it really is important to consider the needs of all your different consumer groups as you're developing product. And it's important to keep tabs on the travel numbers because, like I said, people buy things for travel. We want people to be traveling, and they buy things. So while for luggage and accessories, we asked a question, what are you going to buy for travel in the next 6 months? And I'm not surprised that luggage and travel accessories and bags are lower down because, like we said, they're not being purchased very frequently. But I think what this shows you is that people buy things to make their travel better and easier and more fun. And I do think that there is still more opportunity within retail to do cross-merchandising. tell that travel story. And it's particularly hard in some of the bigger chain stores where the luggage, is downstairs, at the bottom of the escalator, but the swimwear is up on the third floor, right? I think there is just more opportunity out there to really tell the travel story. And that's because, like we said, we don't purchase luggage that frequently. So not that there isn't opportunity. What we need to be thinking about are what are those features that are going to get consumers back to purchasing, to upgrade, to replace, to buy peripheral products as well. That's also because if we're not buying luggage that frequently, it's about 40% say that they buy every 1 to 5 years, or not, it's also 40% 3 to 10 years, but then a third say rarely or never. So we got to get those people really trying to understand why. I mean, you saw that growth coming out of the pandemic in the slide that I showed earlier, but if I went back even further to some of the older data that we had, luggage was a pretty stable, non-exciting, no offense, category for many years. And then in the mid 2010s, we started to see a lot of innovation. And all of a sudden, it was like, okay, it's important to have great travel products with a lot of function that make travel great. And so that really created a lot of excitement in the industry. And I think, that will continue even through some times that are a little softer. So, just to sum up, and this is where I start getting really silly with my travel puns, I think this year is going to be a little bumpy. It's going to be, across retail, across industries. Macro pressures on the consumer definitely going to challenge spending, and we do see a slowing travel goods market. But there is opportunity. There is runway out there. I think travel and experience will remain a key priority this year and in the years to come. And clearly, consumers are seeing great value in really functional, great quality travel products. So that puts us in a good position. And so that leaves everyone at the controls, right? So it's not the time. A lot of companies make the mistake of when things are a little bit tough to, slam on the brakes a little bit. And obviously, you have to make sound business decisions given the environment out there. But it really is time to, continue to pull back on that throttle, and because we're going to need to work harder to stimulate the demand. And so I know I don't need to say this in this audience, innovation is key. And I'm seeing a lot of it out there, and it's not also just in the product, right? It's the product, it's the merchandising, it's the distribution, it's the marketing, it's the messaging. We've got this whole new generation of Gen Zers and Gen Alphas coming up behind them that are going to start, to travel more on their own. And how do we tell that story to this new generation and develop products for them? And then, seizing some of those opportunities that may seem small, like, a lot of the functionality that we're adding in, maybe in the grand scheme of things, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're making small improvements and small opportunities. Maybe if you see those in maybe where you can distribute your product, or if you can make a little bit of change to how you're talking about it, how you're working with influencers, which has become, certainly very important. So definitely, continue to push ahead. And I think that the industry, although overall we might slow, there's going to be growth opportunities, and there will be plenty of winners out there. So thanks very much. You can see me and my colleague Dan's over there. You can scan our codes there to connect on LinkedIn, but also I know there's going to be I think there's another talk starting, but I'm happy to come down and take a couple of questions if anyone wants to hang around. All right. Thank you very much.